All right, Prelude 3. This is the beginning of Unit 3 or Part 3. We're going to be going into the Baroque period. The Baroque timeline is roughly 1600 to 1750, and you can see some developments here in this timeline. We're going to, for the first time, most likely be experiencing music that you've heard before, at least parts of it before. There's going to have some frame of reference for this uh, this time period, as opposed to medieval and prior to that. You probably wouldn't have had a whole lot of exploration in the music of the Renaissance and medieval. So I think you'll start to enjoy some of this music a little bit more. Some interesting things to point out. We've got major things happening in terms of printing, in terms of certain major masterpieces, discoveries like Isaac Newton's theory of gravitation, even the birth of George Washington. So you can kind of see where that fits into American history as well. One of the things I want you to know about Baroque music, excuse me, the Baroque era in general, is that there was a strong emphasis in emotion. And there was a lot of belief that these instruments could add expressive power to music. And, we had kind of been camped out for a while in that vocal music was supreme. That was considered the best. Then we saw development of dance music as instrumental music. And so it continued to build in the Baroque era. One of the things that made that possible was the refinement of the building of the instruments and also the refinement of performance techniques. So musicians were able to perform more precisely and more elaborately. And that also brought with it some new extremes in music. They wanted more intense expression, and they used all of the means available to them to be able to express uh, emotion in music, dynamics and different contrasts, key changes, chromaticism, dissonance and consonance, things like that. As we go through the Baroque era, we will find that there becomes a greater predictability of the musical form of a piece. And so we begin to really settle into certain genres that have a predictable shape to them, which there's a few different reasons for that, but it gave more security to the listener, kind of to know what to expect. Um, in general, the artwork you can see as compared to Michelangelo's left in the Renaissance to Bernini's sculpture in the right. The Renaissance was more about the beauty, but the sereneness of it, the humanistic qualities of art, whereas there was more emotion captured in Baroque art. You can see how his face is uh, grimacing with the action, and his body is in full action with that mid slingshot. So we've got definitely more emotion, more energy, and more movement happening in all sorts of art forms, including music, during the Baroque era. It really was a period of change, a period of adventure and discovery. Lots of discovery in terms of sailing, finding new lands. Um, the conquest of the New World happened during this time, which is a pretty big deal. And a lot of intellectual milestones. These are some names you might have heard of in your history and other studies in high school: Galileo, Copernicus, Descartes, Spinoza, Harvey, Newton. These were some big milestones that happened. So this age of discovery really was strong. There was a bit of a power struggle across the globe. Everyone was clamoring for attention, and they wanted their empire to look the best and to appear the most powerful. That also added in a more uh, a larger division of class, because luxury was seen as such an important thing to show your power. There became more poverty, and so The middle class did emerge more strongly during this time period, but you had more extremes in the lower end in poverty and more extremes in the high end with this very luxurious living, elaborate living. If you take a look at art, if you take a look at some of the architecture, you're going to see a lot of elaborate decorations. The more grandeur they could express, the more important they thought they appeared. The more fancy their art, the more fancy the music, the more fancy the building, the decorations, etc. Literally, they thought that would give them more of, it was like showing off for people and making sure that they knew how important you were. The actual word Baroque means something misshapen or distorted. It referred to a pearl, actually, when the pearl wasn't completely round. That term was actually applied in retrospect. They didn't call, during that time period, they didn't call it Baroque. But when we look back at the art forms and see how this dramatic, extravagant, and irregular style emerged, that's when the Baroque term came. So they loved the dramatic, they loved emotion, they loved expression. You can see here a couple of instruments that were common in the Baroque era. The age of this absolute monarchy was very important. Remember, I said they were all vying for importance and success in these monarchies. Louis XIV had a lot to do with that. He was a very powerful king the in France, and he had the Palace of Versailles. You've probably heard of that or seen pictures. But he really thought he was the sun king or the sun god, called himself that, and he even said, "I am the state." So that gives you the idea of kind of how full he thought of himself. Um, One of the things that was very funded and popular with him and with a lot of these monarchs is the use of music. So the more music and the more fancy the music in their estate, then in their monarchy, then the more important they were. They loved opera, and they loved for operas to have characters that represented them. So they would always be the hero coming to save the day. Um, these monarchs or kings would love for that to be kind of an equivalent to who they were. Middle class culture grew, as did music making in the home. The novel came about during this time period. The comic opera, and it wasn't all serious. Um, so it wasn't just for the elite, but there were also some major developments happening in middle class as well. Religion was still going through the Protestant Reformation, and so we still have that clash between the Catholics and the Protestants. And religion in the New World was emerging as we saw settlers um, coming in on the east coast of North America, the different colonies, and so you see some different religious tendencies springing up there as well. Artists in society could gain employment either with a royal or princely patronage, as they had been, with the king, the monarch, in the empire, or they could work for the church or even the city administration. They got more direct contact with their public, and their performances were for special occasions. They might have to do something for a king's birthday or some stately celebration. They had to write pretty quickly, and they had to write on demand. And so the use of forms was very important to them because of that need to produce music on demand. Some of the music elements that I want you to pay attention to are the shift from using more homophony and less polyphony. So the new style preferred was having a melody over simple chords. Um, we're going to talk about the Florentine Camerata, but that was a group of aristocratic humanists, intellectuals that were interested in bringing back the Greek drama. There was evidence that the Greek dramas were sung, that music was said to have heightened the emotional power of the text. And so this started opera. Early opera was based on this outgrowth from the Florentine Camerata, this group of individuals. A few new harmonic structures I want you to be familiar with. Figured bass, which is basically patterns of numbers notated in the music that indicated which chords to play. The basso continuo is also a style there. Instrumentalists providing harmony in the way of always having this basso continuo, this certain amount of chords, this type of chords being played underneath the music. And also the establishment of the major minor tonality, no longer the modes, but the major scale, the minor scale, and basing music on those scales was the new norm. And so music began to sound a lot more similarly in harmony and chordal structure than we are used to now today. That's called functional harmony, when you have certain chords that have to go in certain orders to shape the piece of music. That was being developed during this time. And that was also being helped out by the fact that you could tune instruments more precisely, which helped them have more flexibility with those harmonies. The Baroque style was very expressive, wide sweeping melodies, highly expressive melodies, rhythm really driving the pieces forward, more use of dissonant chords to provide that emotional intensity and color, use of dynamic contrasts, more so section to section than within the piece, but you might have a soft section and then a loud section. That forte means loud, piano means soft. And in the later 17th century, which is the late 1600s, they referred to these emotions as affections. So they would build a musical piece on one affection or on one emotion. That was very important to them. So you might see the word affections. This is King Louis XIV's Hall of Mirrors in the Palace of Versailles. You can see how ornate this was. All these mirrors, crystal chandeliers, the ceiling, all the trim, lots and lots of pomp and circumstance there. The virtuoso musician was very important. So the more fancy, I guess you could say, the player was able to play, the more popular they would be. And so the musicians had to have a lot of good techniques and advanced playing techniques. The instruments had to be able to handle it as well. Opera was the same when opera arose. Those virtuoso singers were important. One of the things to note is the castrato singer, which is a male singer who was castrated in boyhood to preserve his high range. And so it was a unique thing because he grew up into an adult male with full lungs, full breath support, the muscles of a man, but the range of a prepubescent boy. So it was a very interesting time period and very popular in opera for them to have heroic roles as castratos. Women also were able to have a career as professional singers and in opera, but there were a lot of males still dominating the scene. We'll take a look more at that. But one of the important things for these singers and the instrumentalists was the ability to do improvisation. That's where they really got to show off their virtuoso style. And so that was very popular with all sorts of music playing, adding those embellishments in. That's what the crowds waited for and wanted to hear. There was a lot more exoticism interest in opera and in other art forms. And so they were able to travel more, be exposed to the national styles of different cultures. And so they started to really develop individual country styles, and that would blend and be pulled into different art forms from country to country. Italy's was known for more sensuous melodies. France was known more for its dance rhythms. Germany was still pretty heavy in polyphony, and England was known for its choral songs, and so they got to share a lot of their knowledge together. Thank you.